Hi, it's Katrina. Today, things are getting mystical. Imagine a hidden city in the mountains, but the only way to get to it is if you truly believe it's there. I'll be sharing some hidden knowledge from the ancient world and let you decide if you think the world might be a better place if only we knew what the ancients did. The sacred city of Shambhala. Somewhere deep in the valleys and mountaintops of the Himalayas is said to be the mystical city of Shambhala. Although that's only one name for it, it's been given many names throughout the centuries. Some call it the land of living gods, others call it the land of white water, or the land of radiant spirits. Shambhala itself is a word derived from Sanskrit, meaning land of happiness. There is no proof that Shambhala exists or has ever existed, yet it appears throughout many Asian cultures and their mythologies. To Hindus, Buddhists, and Tibetans, Shambhala is where demigods and superhumans live. The city smells of flowers, with its scenic beauty unlike anything any other city can hope to achieve. But there is one issue with Shambhala. Only those who are pure of spirit and pure of mind can find it. Its entrance is hidden to everyone else, which means Shambhala must be on an entirely different plane of existence. Let's look a little closer at the Hindu idea of Shambhala. In the Hindu tradition, there is no heaven like Christianity claims. Their version of heaven is Shambhala, but it's located on earth, not in the clouds. Hindus believe that when a human, after however many reincarnations it takes, finally has good karma, they will enter the city. It's closer to Christianity than you might expect. In both religions, you need to have a good soul to reach eternal happiness, but for Hindus, there is no salvation through Jesus Christ. They need to find their own goodness within their souls if they want to enter the gates of Shambhala. But could it be a real city? It's a question many have asked over the centuries, and there have even been expeditions to find it. The Russians went in search of Shambhala after the First World War. Later, Hitler sent a group to find Shambhala as well, led by Heinrich Himmler. The famous Russian author Nicholas Roerich once claimed that he saw a UFO while exploring the Himalayas. One of his guides told him that UFOs are used by the people who live in Shambhala to visit other worlds. The shockingly long lives of Buddhas. Ancient people lived much longer lives than we do today, at least according to certain ancient texts they did. The coincidence historians have a hard time reconciling is that books from Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and the ancient Sumerians all have one major thing in common. People lived for a crazy long time, and yet these days, people typically kick the bucket before reaching triple digits, so what gives? The Bible tells us that before the flood, the descendants of Adam and Eve lived for centuries at a time. Noah himself lived for 950 years. Lamech lived for 777 years, and Enoch lived for 365 years. As the centuries wore on, biblical figures lived shorter and shorter lives. Moses only lived 120 years, and after that, humans didn't live longer than a century, except for the occasional one. You may have heard about the incredible longevity of Christian figures, but I'm not ready to stop there. Have you heard about Vipassi? Or what about the 27 Buddhas who came before Gautama Buddha? If you haven't, you're going to be blown away. In Buddhist tradition, there were 27 Buddhas who preceded the main Buddha most people are familiar with. Buddha isn't a deity or anything like that. Many think the Buddha was the Asian version of Jesus, but that's not true at all. Buddha as a title simply means awakened one. Anyone can become a Buddha if they reach the ultimate stage of enlightenment, which is what Buddhism essentially teaches. Before Siddhartha Gautama reached enlightenment and became a Buddha somewhere in South Asia during the 6th century BC, when he founded Buddhism as a religion, the ancient texts say there were 27 others. The 22nd was Vipassi, who was born in India. Apparently, he was alive for 84,000 years. Wow, that's a huge jump even from Noah, who lived for almost 1,000 years. In the Buddhist text, the Buddhavamsa, which describes the life of Gautama Buddha and those who came before him, it says 84,000 years was typical for anyone back then. But it gets even weirder. Vipassi was 121 feet tall, making him even bigger than the Nephilim in the Bible. He also radiated light as if he were a giant human light bulb. In Hinduism, gods and heroes had a similar lifespan. The ancient god Rama ruled his kingdom of Ayodhya for 11,000 years, but his father, Dasharatha, lived for over 60,000 years. This can all be found in Hindu scripture and in the ancient book, the Ramayana. It also says that the god Krishna lived for 125 years between 3228 and 3102 BC. As a side note, I want to mention that the first king of Vietnam, Kinh Duong Vuong, lived 127 years between 2919 and 2792 BC. That was very near to when Krishna was supposedly alive in India. Hindu figures and biblical figures lived incredibly long lives, and then their lifespans dropped to only about a century. And at the same time, too, about 5,000 years ago. Similar claims can be found in Egyptian religion, in Japanese myth, in Greek legends, and in tales from early Persian empires. But the big question remains, is it true? Did humans live for hundreds or thousands of years before something happened in 3000 BC that shortened our lifespans? What knowledge have we lost? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And now for number 10, but first, it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Beth Dunaway and Brian Griffin for supporting this channel. Thanks, guys! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries, or dinosaurs, or hidden ancient knowledge. We've got it all! Secrets of the Babylonian Stars. 3,000 years before today, the ancient Babylonians looked to the stars for answers. Soothsayers climbed the steep steps of Ziggurat and gazed up at the sky. What they saw there, they recorded on lumps of clay using a reed as a pen. They carved cuneiform characters into their lumps of soft clay, writing down the movements of heavenly bodies. Now, 3 millennia later, many of the clay tablets used by the soothsayers have been discovered in the ruins of Babylonian cities across modern Iraq. Scientists know, based on their translations, that the soothsayers, known as Umanu, had an excellent understanding of the cosmos. Some of their lists record the distance between stars as if they had been looking at them through modern telescopes. There are 2 major questions that scientists are left with no answers to. They don't know what the Babylonians were looking for in the stars, and they don't know how they had such sophisticated knowledge of the distance of things in outer space. There is one possibility, but it's almost too crazy for me to tell you about. I'll tell you anyway. One theory is that the Babylonians were searching the heavens for a group of gods that the Sumerians had seen 2,000 years earlier, the Anunnaki. The Babylonians weren't the first to look at the stars and record what they saw. The Sumerians were doing it much earlier. The Sumerians created the cuneiform writing system used by the Babylonians. They also identified and named the constellations, perhaps before anyone else. By 1700 BC, observing the sky was already an established science. Unfortunately, though, much of what the Sumerians learned and passed on to the Babylonians was lost around the 1st century BC. The great cities of Mesopotamia fell into a downward spiral of ruin. They were dominated by the Persians, and then Alexander the Great showed up with his Greeks. Cuneiform script became an archaic thing of the past, much like Latin is to English speakers today. It was replaced by Aramaic and Greek. Astrology was also largely abandoned, and soon the old wisdom of Mesopotamia had completely been lost. It's our duty today to try and regain some of that wisdom. To do this, modern scholars analyze every last piece of evidence they can find, especially when it comes to cuneiform tablets. By studying hundreds and thousands of the tablets, researchers have gathered a fairly good idea of what the Babylonian worldview was like. Their kings, just like the kings of Sumer, were considered representatives of the gods on Earth. It all goes back to stargazing. The Sumerians were obsessed with astrology because they believed that they had come from the stars. They thought the Anunnaki, their gods, were real entities from another planet in the solar system. They watched the stars because they always anticipated them returning. Thousands of years later, the Babylonians continued watching the stars in anticipation of the Anunnaki's return. But are they ever coming back? Perhaps modern humans will never know the original cosmic knowledge given to the first generation of Sumerians The narcotic lily of psychedelic healing. The Egyptian lotus, which is also sometimes called the blue lotus, is a flower unlike anything you have in your household garden. It isn't just a thing of beauty, nor was it only a symbol of life and immortality to the ancient Egyptians. The pretty blue water lily also has a secret. A narcotic secret connected to ancient psychedelic healing techniques. The scientific name of the flower is Nymphaea caerulea. It's considered an entheogen, which means that consuming the water lily can alter a person's mind. It can change the way they behave, how they think, and their perception of the world. For thousands of years, the flower has been used across many cultures to connect with a higher power. While the Egyptian lotus originated along the Nile, there are variants that can be found all over the world. Similar water lilies were used by the Maya, the Thai, and the Syrians. The flowers always come with an intoxicating aroma and excellent medicinal qualities. Even today, certain naturalistic healers use the Egyptian lotus to treat everything from depression to insomnia. It's also used to treat anxiety, upset stomachs, and is a natural aphrodisiac. Forget chocolate and wine, you just need the blue lotus flower. Though in no way am I suggesting that you actually eat the flower. Egyptian lotus contains two very specific compounds that alter your brain. The first is apomorphine, which gives the feeling of euphoria and happiness. The second is nuciferine, which works as an antipsychotic to induce feelings of calmness and tranquility. Eating the flower can give a person an experience similar to doing real drugs. That's likely why it's illegal to be cultivated, sold, or purchased, especially in the state of Louisiana. Let's get back to ancient Egypt. Long before Louisiana made the water lily illegal, the Egyptians understood how to harness its power. I'm sure you've heard of the Book of the Dead. It was one of the most important books for the Egyptians, containing information on their religion, traditions, magic, and medicines. It's a comprehensive dictionary of Egyptian spiritual wisdom. The Book of the Dead is also one of the main sources that scientists use when studying the plant because the Egyptians had such a strong understanding of it. They used the water lily in many of their supernatural rituals. The flower was used to help the deceased reach the afterlife. It was used in remedies, spells, and to invoke the power of the gods themselves. In 1500 BC, the Egyptians wrote the Eber Papyrus. It's another ancient book, 3,500 years old, and contains over 800 medical recipes, many of which involved the blue lotus. It's incredible to think that in this day and age, plants used to heal the soul are downright illegal to even grow in our modern world. How much wiser could the Egyptians have been than us? The wisdom of the Library of Celsus. When it comes to lost knowledge of the ancients, you don't have to look any further than the great lost libraries of the world. You've heard of the Library of Alexandria before and how its wealth of recorded information was lost. And you may have even heard of other destroyed libraries, like the Library of Ashurbanipal or the House of Wisdom. But what do you know of the Library of Celsus? Located in western Turkey, this great repository of human knowledge once contained more than 12,000 scrolls. Ancient historians wrote that it was one of the most impressive buildings in the Roman Empire, and that's astounding considering the amazing things the Romans built, like the Colosseum and the Temple of Hercules. The Library of Celsus was built in the 2nd century AD, when Rome was thriving in a big way. There's even a little bit of the library left now, with its facade standing in the city of Ephesus. But where is the wisdom? Unfortunately, it's all gone. When you walked into this library after its completion, you would have been greeted by 4 monumental statues. The statues represented wisdom, intelligence, knowledge, and virtue. Inside, past the statues, was a marble floor of about 2,000 square feet, and every wall was lined with niches to store the scrolls. The tragedy, and I'm sure you'll agree with me here, is that nobody knows what any of the scrolls said. That's because in 262 AD, the Goths invaded and burned the place to the ground. Even though Ephesus survived until an earthquake brought it down in the 10th century, the scrolls in the library were lost forever. Did angels build Lalibela? There are few places in this world quite as mysterious as Lalibela in Ethiopia. But the mystery is for a reason you might find hard to believe. 800 years ago, an Ethiopian king ordered a new capital to be built for all the Christian people of his nation. High above the sea, 8,000 feet up in the northern highlands of Ethiopia, Lalibela was born. Then came its churches, which, according to legend, were built by angels. The Ethiopian highlands were made long before humans ever evolved. 31 million years ago, fissures ripped open the earth and lava spilled across the Horn of Africa about a mile deep. It was a literal sea of lava. Then it dried, becoming the highlands where Lalibela stands today. Prior to the year 400, Christianity took root in Ethiopia, making it one of the earliest kingdoms to embrace Christianity as its predominant faith. A little-known fact is that long before the Vikings became Christian, or the Celts, or the Gauls, or many places in Europe, Ethiopia was home to some of the most powerful Christian kings. One of those kings was Lalibela, who, as legend has it, traveled 1,600 miles north to Jerusalem. When he returned, Lalibela had a vision of the future. He wanted to create a Jerusalem in Africa. And that was how Lalibela got its start. This city never gained the same fame as the real Jerusalem, but it's still around all these years later. Now for the mystery of the churches and the angels. I told you earlier about the lava that was a mile deep. The result of having the whole landscape made from solidified lava is that it's easy to carve. With a little bit of elbow grease, people were able to chisel 11 massive churches from solid rock. This was likely done during the reign of King Lalibela in the 12th century AD. Historians and archaeologists think that when Lalibela went to Jerusalem, he became inspired. When he returned to his country, he ordered the 11 churches to be carved, each from one solid block of stone. That's what the scientists say. But according to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the 11 churches were made by angels. It's a legend that might sound silly to some people, but what if there's some truth to it? Scientists have always wondered why King Lalibela chose to build semi-subterranean churches when there were easier ways to do it. The 11 churches cover an area of 62 acres, with the biggest of them being 8,000 square feet and 4 stories tall. One explanation is that Lalibela got help from angels. If not physical help, then at least inspirational help. No matter what you believe, the 11 mystifying churches of Lalibela are still in use right now. Every year on Christmas Eve, the churches are swarmed with about 200,000 pilgrims. They're convinced that angels gave Lalibela the knowledge needed to build the holy chapels. The Abydos King List. One of the oldest cities in the entire world is in Egypt, and its secrets are too numerous to count. Abydos was founded 5,100 years ago, around 3100 BC. It's older than the pyramids and was home to some of the first rulers of Egypt. Because of its age, Abydos has proven paramount in piecing together the ancient history of the world. There are tombs and temples scattered across the ruins of Abydos, but I want to take you into one very particular temple, the Temple of Seti I. It was within the walls of this ancient place that archaeologists uncovered what might just be the most important list ever made. It's known as the Abydos King List, and it's not how you might be imagining it. It's not a grocery store list written on a scrap of paper. This document is a tablet upon which someone inscribed 3 rows of 38 cartouches. A cartouche is a symbol indicating a king's name. These are all over ancient Egypt. A cartouche consists of an oval border with the king's name written inside of it. This is how Egyptologists are able to instantly recognize when they see a king's name on a wall or a scrap of papyrus. The list is incredible because it names some of the most important Egyptian pharaohs in chronological order. You may even know a few of them, like Amenhotep and Khufu. Khufu was the pharaoh buried inside the Great Pyramid of Egypt, so he's kind of a big deal. Nobody else in the world has ever had a more famous tombstone than this guy. But the list is not comprehensive. Certain rulers were even left off the list on purpose in an attempt to erase them from the history books. Akhenaten, his son Tutankhamun, and the great Queen Hatshepsut and Ai are all missing from the tablet. Researchers think it was because they were seen after their deaths as illegitimate rulers. Even in the 13th century BC, when Seti I ruled Egypt, certain things were being erased with extreme prejudice. You have to wonder how much ancient history was washed away by disgruntled kings who wanted to shape the past to suit them. But what was the list for, anyway? Scholars believe it was made by Seti himself because he didn't come from a royal lineage. He didn't have any royal blood in his veins, so he built a grand temple and filled it with the names of legitimate kings as a way to boost himself up. There is far more going on in the Temple of Seti than just the list of kings. It's also believed to be the place where Osiris, the god of death, was buried. Rumor has it that somewhere underneath the many chambers of the temple is a flooded tomb holding Osiris's waterlogged coffin. The lost language of the Celts. How many languages do you think there are in the world right now? I can tell you that there are over 200 languages spoken in the city of Toronto alone. I can also tell you that there are 7,151 living languages globally. Not all of them are spoken, but they are still alive. How many languages have been lost to history is another matter entirely. Let's break it down even further. There are 142 language families, though only a handful of them are still widely spoken, such as Indo-European languages. If you don't think language is confusing, look at this tree diagram from worldhistory.org. It's crazy that some people have all of these memorized. Inside this tree, you find Celtic languages broken into a whole bunch of categories. Continental languages like Lepontic and Noric are now extinct. In fact, there are only 3 still spoken today. They are all considered Celtic Brythonic languages: Welsh, Cornish, and Breton. These 3 languages are still alive, but aren't spoken by very many people. I want to investigate why languages that used to dominate parts of continental Europe are now hardly spoken at all, and how languages are lost in the first place. Most linguistic scholars believe that prior to the Roman invasion of Great Britain, Brythonic languages were spoken across the British Isles. Then, people who spoke the Celtic languages began borrowing Latin words. There are still about 800 Latin words in Welsh and Cornish. As time passed, Roman and Brittonic languages mixed, but because there were still so many tribes and territories, the mixed languages broke into different dialects. Then, in the 5th century, Roman power in Britain started to collapse, and the Anglo-Saxons showed up speaking Germanic dialects. This resulted in England slowly transitioning into Old English. The people who still spoke Celtic languages fled across the sea to Brittany and France, or into the Highlands. They continued speaking languages like Pictish up until it went extinct as well, around 1129. Tracking this stuff is incredibly hard. What I'm trying to convey is that even on a tiny island like Britain, which fits snugly into a place like Texas, dozens of languages can be lost over just a few centuries. Welsh is considered the only surviving Celtic language that's still frequently spoken and not endangered. A recent population census reported that almost 30% of people in Wales can speak Welsh. That's almost 900,000 Welsh speakers. Plus, people in Canada, Australia, and the United States speak Welsh too. I wish I was one of them, but I'm not. Lost Amazon knowledge. In the last couple centuries, languages, mythologies, and traditions have been lost around the globe, which is why one indigenous tribe in the Amazon decided to preserve their wisdom for the rest of human history. The Matsis peoples of Brazil and Peru did something that no other Amazonian tribe has ever done before. They created an encyclopedia of their ancient medicinal knowledge. It is beyond remarkable, and I don't say that lightly. The encyclopedia was put together with help from 5 shamans in the Acate Amazon Conservation Group. The shamans listed the details of every plant used by the Matsis, including how to use those plants to heal ailments. The book is called The Matsis Traditional Medicine Encyclopedia. It's the only transcript of a tribal group's accumulated wisdom written in their own language and in their own words. What I mean by in their own words is that there are other encyclopedias written about the traditional practices of indigenous groups, but they have always been written by outsiders. kind of like how the Spanish conquistadors wrote down the histories of the Aztec and the Maya while conquering them. This book wasn't intended for outside use. Instead, the book has only been printed in the Matzi's native language. That way, the medicinal knowledge can't be stolen by corporations or scientists. The whole point of the book is to use it for training new shamans in the community. The Matzis only wrote it in the first place because so many shamans are passing away that the knowledge was at risk of being lost forever. How do you feel about knowing there's a book of shamanistic knowledge out there, but you can't even read it? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think other tribes should follow the Matzis and record their wisdom before it's too late? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The ancient map of Catalhuyuk. I told you earlier that Abydos in Egypt was one of the oldest cities in the world. And while that's true, there were older cities to the east in Turkey. Cities like Catalhuyuk, which was built around 7,500 BC. The first stone house was constructed here 2,500 years before Abydos. This place is old, which makes everything found within it a precious treasure. But no one even knew the Neolithic site existed in Turkey until the 1960s. British archaeologist James Mellart is credited with finding Catalhuyuk. From 1961 to 65, excavations resulted in some shocking discoveries, like a wall painting that some still believe is the oldest map in the world. Some say it's a mural, but others are convinced that it's a map. On the other hand, some think it was a geometric design that means absolutely nothing. Either way, it was made in 6600 BC. Take a look at it for yourself. The upper image is a snapshot of the mural, while the bottom is an interpretive drawing of what it originally looked like. The image comes from Ataman Hotel, and the interpretive drawing was done by John Swagger. Most people figure that it's a map, but a new study done by a team of scientists from the University of California has come up with a whole new theory. They think it's a depiction of a volcanic eruption that happened 8,900 years ago. You can see the square-shaped blocks in the mural, which were likely meant to represent the houses of a village. And above them is what looks suspiciously like a volcano erupting. To confirm their theory, researchers from the university analyzed volcanic rocks taken from the nearby Mount Hassan. Sure enough, analysis confirmed that there was a huge eruption around the same time the drawing was made. But what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? It means that human beings capable of building entire cities were already recording important events 9,000 years ago. They were like Stone Age historians. If only modern researchers could decipher other ancient paintings and even cave drawings tens of thousands of years old. Imagine how much lost knowledge could be restored to the world. The strange history of eclipses. In the aftermath of the recent solar eclipse, I think it'd be fun to talk a little about what people in the Middle Ages thought of these celestial events. Because to them, eclipses weren't just spectacles to peer out between your fingers or with glasses. Just a few centuries ago, an eclipse was an omen, a predictor of the future, and a glimpse into the secret knowledge of the universe. Medieval astronomers knew how to predict eclipses, and so too did the ancients. The issue in the Middle Ages was that even the best astronomers still believed the Earth was the center of the universe. The Sun and the Moon, along with the 5 planets that people knew about, orbited Earth. The Greeks and Romans had thought the same thing 2,000 years earlier. Europeans were also obsessed with the alignments of planets. They thought an eclipse had the power to strengthen the effects of planetary conjunctions, such as Jupiter and Saturn being in alignment. One of the best records of the medieval obsession with eclipses is a book called On Predicting Changes in the Weather, written in 1485 by Firmin de Beauval. It's a compilation dealing with the influence that planets have over weather and future events. One part of the book says that when a solar eclipse is combined with Saturn and Jupiter joined at the head of Aries, the effect will last the next 12,000 years. That's a long time. Do you think medieval astronomers were onto something? Could the planets and their alignments, along with eclipses, have more power than people realize? The magic island of Avalon. There is a really strange connection between ancient Celtic folklore and the Bible. In the Bible, Eve eats the forbidden fruit, essentially spoiling the rest of human existence for everybody. These days, the fruit Eve ate is usually depicted as an apple. In Celtic lore, apples were symbols of immortality and hell. It could just be a random coincidence, but maybe not. There does seem to be an uncanny link between apples and things that are forbidden. I'm talking about apples because I want to explore the mythical utopia of Avalon with you. Avalon was originally known as the Island of Apples by the Celts. It was the Celtic version of the Garden of Eden. See, there's the connection again. As the centuries went by, Celtic folklore mixed with Arthurian legends. The Island of Apples became Avalon, the final resting place of King Arthur and home of the enchantress Morgan Le Fay. Legend has it that Avalon was such a bountiful place that you could pick apples from the trees all year long. People didn't starve on the island of Avalon. There was no violence. Even time itself flowed a little differently, allowing humans to live in Avalon without growing old. It was a place where magic soaked the very fabric of existence. It sounds like a wonderful place, but good luck getting there. Nobody has ever found the real location of Avalon. Some scholars think Avalon was based on a real city, perhaps in Glastonbury. There is a legend that in the 12th century, King Edward II of England sent a secret expedition to Glastonbury Tor, a hill that rose above the marshes. There, the sarcophagus of King Arthur was stolen from the ruins of Avalon. There are a lot of other theories too. Some say Avalon was located in Berg-by-Sands near Hadrian's Wall in the north of England. Some say it's not in England, but in France, on the island called Ile Aval. Poet Robert Graves suggested Avalon is on the Spanish island of Majorca. There's even been a connection drawn between Avalon and the Viking realm of Helheim, the Norse version of Hades. But what do the legends say about King Arthur? The myth is that after Arthur was mortally wounded at the Battle of Camlan, the 9 fairy queens took him on a boat to Avalon. He was laid upon a golden bed where he succumbed to his injuries. Another version is that he never died. Arthur is still in a coma, being watched over by the fairy queens until he returns to save his people. Avalon is likely the closest mythical place in the Western world to Shambhala. Either it's a magical island filled with ancient secrets, or it's nothing but a fairy tale. Do you believe in King Arthur and the mythical island of Avalon? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and stick around for another video you might have missed. See you later. The Cloud Warriors of Peru's Atlantis. There is a mysterious race of people who once lived in what some have called the Peruvian Atlantis. They are known officially as the Chachapoya, or the Cloud People, and they are thought to have thrived around 750 to 800 AD in Peru. They carved out settlements in the dense mountain forests in the northern Andes, prospered greatly, built an impressive kingdom, and then fell to the Inca in 1470. The true name of these people is still unknown, since Chachapoya was the name given to them by the Inca before they were conquered. In 1535, when the Spanish arrived and discovered the mysterious Cloud People being subjugated by the Inca, they formed an alliance. Spanish conquistadors wrote of how impressed they were with the ferocity and strength of the unusual tribe in the mountains. The Spanish were hoping to work together with the Cloud Warriors to defeat the Inca more easily. Then they would give the Chachapoya the land back, which was stolen from them. However, the arrival of the Europeans was the beginning of the end for the Cloud People of South America. Smallpox spread across the New World and wiped out every last Chachapoya. It spread all the way to the Aztecs in Mexico and helped wipe them out too. One of the strangest descriptions of the Chachapoya came from a Spanish conqueror named Pedro Cieza de León. It's his description of the Cloud People that really makes them so mysterious. He wrote that the Cloud Warriors of the Andes Mountains were the whitest and most handsome of any people he had ever seen. He also said their wives were the most beautiful women, much more beautiful than the wives of the Inca. Pedro León was not the only Spanish conqueror to write about the Cloud Warriors either. Everyone who described them did so in the same way. And because of this, we know the Chachapoya were blonde, had light skin, and looked more European than South American. But what was a race of white people doing in Peru 1,000 years ago? They would have been the only white-skinned people in the entire Western Hemisphere, and scientists have no obvious explanation. The darkest day. On May 19th, 1780, the sun came up as it did every day, but only for a moment. The skies over New England then became dark, as if it were the blackest night. It became known as the Dark Day, when women screamed and held their babies and men dropped to their knees and prayed. Even George Washington, in the midst of fighting the Revolutionary War, wrote in his diary about the mysterious darkness that shrouded every city in gloom. This was such a huge deal that thousands of workers reportedly left their jobs early and either went straight to church or straight to the tavern. The children were sent home from school, cattle stopped grazing and hid in their stalls, and everywhere in New England, people thought Judgment Day had come. But what actually happened? Amazingly, it wouldn't be until the 2000s that scientists finally figured out what caused such widespread panic. Scientists discovered fire scars near the Great Lakes in Canada from the year 1780. There was a wildfire burning in Canada so severe that it sent giant black clouds over New England to block out the sun. It was nothing but a wildfire, and yet it inspired mass hysteria on an unprecedented level. The Ogre Neanderthals. In folklore, an ogre is a gigantic humanoid monster. Ogres are found in fairy tales and legends and in just about every fantasy movie. Ogres are almost always depicted as unintelligent, oafish, and dull. And not unlike the trolls in The Lord of the Rings, real ogres supposedly eat human flesh. These creatures have been used to scare children since stories were first being told. In medieval Europe, young kids were warned that if they weren't on their best behavior, an excited ogre would attack them, kidnap them, and then probably eat them. There are other stories about ogres as well. Some who have written of these mythical creatures over the years have painted them in gentler light, making them shy and reclusive and misunderstood. But what if ogres weren't creatures of myth at all? And what if ogres and trolls originated from something that was a very real and living being? There is a curious theory that says trolls and ogres started off as Neanderthal humans. It's true that Homo sapiens lived at the same time as Neanderthals, and some theories say we were even the ones who destroyed them through our expansion out of Africa. Based on all the Neanderthal bones scientists have investigated, we know these creatures were bigger and stronger than us, more ape-like, and a lot more ogre-esque. And so, what if the ogre from ancient mythology is just a weird memory of our distant relatives, the Neanderthals? We don't know if it's true, but experts say it could be a real possibility. The Star Shaft. There are two narrow ducts leading out of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza. These shafts are commonly referred to as star shafts. There are also two shafts in the walls of the Queen's Chamber, though these aren't quite as popular as the other two. It's because these star shafts are blocked on both the outside and the inside, leaving experts with very little clue as to what they were used for. Not only that, but if scientists compare the star shafts in the King's Chamber to those of the Queen's Chamber, their scientific theory doesn't make much more sense. Scientists believe the shafts were meant to circulate air, but if that were the truth, why would the star shafts in the Queen's Chamber be sealed? Plus, these kinds of shafts have not been found in any other pyramid in Egypt, which casts major doubt on the whole ventilation theory. But because scientists can't verify the purpose of the shafts, all we're left with is speculation. Some experts believe they were used to observe certain stars from inside the pyramid itself. This theory is getting way more traction than the ventilation hypothesis, and is the closest we've gotten to a logical answer. Scientists suggest the shafts were meant to point at Alpha Draconis, Orion's belt, Sirius, and Beta Ursae Minoris. The star shafts were most likely meant to direct the spirit of the pharaoh to these stars, so that he could go on a journey through the cosmos. Russian Moose Geoglyph. There is a mysterious geoglyph in Russia that might just be older than the famous Nazca Lines of Peru. The strange pattern in Russia can be found near Lake Zayuratkul, not far from the border of Kazakhstan. It shows what appears to be some kind of moose or deer, something with a long muzzle, 4 legs, and at least 2 antlers. The entire geoglyph measures 900 feet long,
and was only discovered in 2011. It can only be seen from the sky, and as in such a remote region, nobody ever noticed it before. Plus, the geoglyph was covered by a thin layer of soil, and it was almost completely invisible. According to Stanislav Grigoriev from the Russian Academy of Sciences Institute of History and Archaeology, the geoglyph was made from small and large stones. Bigger stones were placed along the edges of the geoglyph like borders, and the insides of the structure were filled in with much smaller stones. The hooves of the moose were put together using small crushed rocks and pieces of clay. Even more miraculous is the fact that excavation teams have found stone pickaxes and other primitive tools that had been used to create the ancient artistic masterpiece. These tools date back to the Neolithic period, between 6,000 and 3,000 years ago. That makes the Russian moose at least 2,500 years older than the Nazca Lines. But what in the world the moose is doing in the middle of the Russian wilderness is still a mystery. Baalbek Trilithon. In the Lebanese town of Baalbek, once known as Heliopolis or the City of the Sun, there lies a gigantic and very mysterious piece of rock. It's the largest hewn stone ever found, a truly megalithic piece of debris at the ruins of the Jupiter Baal Temple. The Jupiter Baal Temple was an ancient place of worship built by the Romans in 27 BC. This was when they were still worshipping what would soon become false idols and old gods, like Baal from Canaanite mythology. In front of the temple, which today is nothing but a decrepit ruin, there are 3 large hewn stones. Each one weighs over 750 tons, and they are known together as the Trilithon. But the stones might not have anything to do with the temple after all. The big mystery about them is that scientists believe they predate the founding of Heliopolis and even Alexander the Great in 334 BC. This would mean the temple was built around the stones, and that they had been carved into blocks by an unknown group who came before them. And finally, there's the biggest stone of all. In addition to the Trilithon, there is a huge stone called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman inside the temple itself. It was carved but never moved, and weighs roughly 1,200 tons. To put that into perspective, that's the same weight as 3 Boeing 747s, or large commercial airplanes. This stone was cut, never transported, and the temple seemed to have been built around it. It's almost as if this stone was what the ancient Romans were worshipping. Cyclopean walls. Cyclopean masonry was the ancient architectural style of fitting together very large but non-uniform stone blocks without using mortar. Cyclopean masonry involved putting these weirdly shaped stone blocks together in such a precise way that not a single gap was left between them. Scholars say it was the Romans who built the astounding ancient walls of Italy, whose example of Cyclopean architecture can be found in Lazio, Umbria, Tuscany, and many other places. But some researchers don't think it was the Romans at all, but someone who came much earlier. One of the biggest issues is that there isn't any Cyclopean masonry in Rome itself. These peculiar walls can only be found outside of Rome in smaller cities. Hilltop fortifications, aqueducts, agricultural terraces, and even villas in the countryside all boast Cyclopean styles. But the style itself goes back even beyond the Romans to the earliest Greek civilizations of the Bronze Age, starting around 3000 BC. It was the Mycenaeans who first fit giant boulders together to create these types of walls. And since it's clear that the Romans never practiced this kind of masonry, it's believed that the Mycenaeans, after the destruction of their cities in the Aegean around 1200 BC, migrated to Italy. It could have been these Mycenaeans, or at least their descendants, who built some of Italy's most impressive architecture. Mysterious giant circles. A strange mystery only seen from the sky brings us to 3 countries: Turkey, Syria, and Jordan. Archaeologists have identified over a dozen mysterious circles in these countries, and nobody knows why they were built. One of them, a gigantic circle known only as J1, stretches 1,280 feet in diameter across the desert wasteland of Jordan. These circles are at least 2,000 years old, and each one is made of stones piled a couple of feet high, and each one is at least 1,000 feet in diameter. The first of these circles were seen by aircraft flying in the 1920s, and were more recently brought to the world's attention by researcher David Kennedy at the University of Western Australia. Kennedy told the Washington Post that it was 60 years after the circles were spotted the first time that anyone went back to look at them. But it's only been in the last decade that Kennedy and his team have tried to figure out what they are doing in the middle of the desert. Unfortunately, the scientists still don't have a clue. The walls were built too low to keep animals inside. They obviously weren't used for housing, and they couldn't have been used to keep food or valuables. They most likely weren't animal traps, as they wouldn't have been effective. The only thing researchers can think of is that these circles were used for some kind of ritual activity, but there's no real proof. Mystery medieval skeleton. Archaeologists discovered the skeletal remains of a man face down in the muck of the River Thames in London. He was discovered still wearing his leather boots, which made him an instant celebrity in the world of archaeology. According to Beth Richardson from Mola Headland Infrastructure, the boots are about knee-high, made from leather quarters, and were stitched together using waxed flax thread. The workmanship of the boots dated the mysterious skeleton back to the 1400s. Once the body was dated, the big question became, how did he get in the river in the first place? Well, it all goes back to the boots. Since he was wearing gigantic leather boots all the way up to his knees, he was almost certainly either a mudlark or a fisherman. Mudlarks were people who waded through the polluted waters of London's greatest river looking for treasure and goodies. He might have been looking for coins or maybe scraps of metal. It could have been anything at all. He also could have been a fisherman who fell off a boat. But the prevailing theory right now is that he was looking through the mud for treasure when he got stuck and drowned. The Abernethy Round Tower. The Abernethy Round Tower is one of Scotland's more unusual historical sites. It's one of 2 round towers built in the Irish style still standing in Scotland, and its origins are a complete mystery. Historians believe the tower was built in roughly 1100 AD and most likely served as a bell tower for a local church. The structure stands 73 feet high and has a diameter of 15 feet. A short climb to its top is definitely worth it because it offers sweeping views of the sprawling green countryside. It also gives a bird's eye view of the churchyard. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding the tower is the fact that its first 12 layers of brick are made of a completely different material than the rest of the tower. There is a big chunk at the bottom that's clearly older than the rest, leaving historians baffled as to when the original structure was built. It may have been a smaller tower with fewer floors, then was torn down and reconstructed. The newest part of the tower is the clock, which was installed in 1868. The watchtowers of Argun Gorge. The famous Ushkaloi twin towers of the Argun Gorge are located in the heart of Chechnya. The gorge itself has been home to countless cultures, filled with roughly 600 monuments of ancient history, archaeology, culture, and nature. The gorge was used as a pass for caravans during the Middle Ages and was home to nomadic tribes who lived in the impassable jungles and sheltered against the steep rock walls. Here you can find cave grottos, burial tombs, ancestral crypts from the 10th century, and even ruined castle complexes. But by far the most striking pieces of advanced ancient engineering are the towers, which dominate the skyline atop bridges and mountain peaks throughout Chechnya. In general, these architectural wonders are called Vainak towers and range anywhere from 30 to 75 feet tall. Some towers were used as residential structures, built in medieval settlements like Urzy and Nikaroy. Others were built as military installations. The oldest of them all date back 2,000 years. The Ushkaloi twin towers themselves, known as the Great Watch Houses over the gorge, are only about 900 years old. What makes them especially fascinating is that they were built out of the solid rock of the gorge, guarding the pass. Nobody would have been able to move through the passage without walking past these imposing towers. The ingenuity of such a design feat is impressive, and even more impressive that the towers haven't yet crumbled. The Inca road system. There is a lot of talk about how great the ancient Roman roads once were, and while it's true that the Romans did develop an impressive system of roadways to connect their empire, they weren't the only ones. Thousands of miles away on the other side of the world, the Inca were also tying together an empire using roads. There are thousands of miles of pathways in South America, all created by the Inca so their people could travel across their vast kingdom. Inca roads were made from interlocking stones, laid across some of the most epic landscapes on the planet. These roads can be found on the coast, high up in cloud forests, and are in 6 modern-day countries. One of the ancient passageways is still used on a daily basis by tourists who climb to Machu Picchu. According to Ramiro Matos with the Smithsonian National Museum, there could be up to 37,000 miles of roadways built by the ancient Inca, winding through Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, and of course Peru. It's amazing because the vast empire didn't have a writing system that we've found yet. They didn't even use the wheel in any practical sense. And yet they built one of the greatest road systems the world has ever seen. It was complete with interstates, major highways, local roads, and dirt paths leading into the more rural parts of the empire. The road operated for less than 100 years, active from between 1450 to 1532. Sadly, when the Spanish arrived, they were able to use these roads to conquer the entire Inca Empire more easily. The roads led the Spanish conquistadors from city to city as they launched an endless assault and subjugated the natives. Leonardo's Mechanical Knight. In roughly 1495, the great inventor Leonardo da Vinci came up with a technology long before his time. He created a mechanical knight, or an automaton knight. It was a humanoid robot that functioned kind of like a giant steel puppet. The blueprints for the robot were uncovered in sketchbooks belonging to Leonardo da Vinci that were dug up in the 1950s. In his notes, he claims that he showed the machine at a festival in the court of Milan with great success. The robot could stand, it was able to raise its visor, and it even maneuvered its arms independently. It obviously didn't have artificial intelligence or any kind of electronics, but it was the first functional robot to come to life. Its robotic systems were worked by a series of pulleys and cables rather than hydraulics and switches. Although the actual robot has never been found, we know Leonardo da Vinci's design really did work. After the sketchbook was discovered, modern scientists built their own version of the robot in 2007, exactly as the design was described in his journal. They discovered it to be 100% functional. Even clad in heavy medieval armor, it still mimicked human motions. The Pyramids of Palau. The Pyramids of Palau are some of the most highly advanced pieces of engineering from the ancient world. Recently, archaeologists conducted studies of these pyramids located on the island nation of Palau. They uncovered both the construction methods and how much work it took to build them. There was a large team of researchers involved, with everything from soil scientists to ordinary archaeologists. They concluded that the ancient builders used volcanic rock and a huge quantity of ceramics to form the base of each pyramid. They then created the upper layers using a specific kind of soil. Unlike many pyramids across the world that were used as temples or tombs, these were used for horticulture. At the summits of the pyramids, food was grown to feed the island residents. This is a pretty exciting revelation. On this isolated island in Oceania, there was a culture of people who cared more about food and prosperity than burying their leaders in monumental wastes of resources. They built pyramids simply to grow food, although some were used as burial sites. At the tops of some of these pyramids, researchers have found bones, but for the most part, this was all agricultural. Even more amazing is that the development of these pyramids and the complex society on Palau started sometime around 500 BC. The construction of the pyramids didn't happen overnight either. It took generations. Millions of tons of soil had to be moved by workers, something that was only possible in a politically organized society that didn't squabble amongst themselves. The fact that the pyramids took hundreds of years to complete proves shocking stability in the governance of the island. This really was a remarkable culture, both for their engineering feats and for their ability to work towards a single achievable goal: boring through granite. One of the biggest mysteries when it comes to technology from the ancient Egyptians is that they bored straight through granite. Sure, the Egyptians had advances in medicine, astronomy, writing, culture, and more, but it's really their stonework and the fact that they were able to cut and drill straight through granite that makes them almost unbelievable. Granite is specifically important in this case because it's considered far more difficult to cut and manipulate than softer rocks like limestone and sandstone. Right now, the mainstream view of archaeologists is that the ancient Egyptians achieved this feat using copper, bronze, and wood. Egyptian masons put these three things together to create highly advanced tools that bored through granite. There were others who insist the Egyptians used advanced technology handed to them by a group of superior beings. The truth is, we haven't found definitive evidence in either case. We've obviously never found ancient Egyptian batteries to suggest they were using modern technology, and we also haven't found any serious copper-brass mechanisms that could have worked drills through the hard rock. Right now, we just have to assume the Egyptians were seriously ingenious and put simplistic tools to really good use. Persian refrigerators. About 2,400 years ago, Persian engineers built the world's very first refrigerator. It didn't have coils and it wasn't small enough to fit in the kitchen, but it did work well enough that the Persians could store ice in the summer in one of the hottest places in the world. Ice would be chopped from nearby mountains in huge amounts during the winter, brought down to the desert settlement, and then stored in this large ancient refrigerator. For 400 BC, this was a very impressive piece of technology. It was called a yakchal, and it was used to store ice gathered in the winters through to summer. The ice stored in these huge refrigerators was used to make chilled treats for royal Persians in the devastating heat of summer, as well as for food storage. Here's how the refrigerator worked. It was an above-ground structure made from mud brick into the shape of a dome, usually around 60 feet tall. Within the dome was an underground space with storage capacity. The space was equipped with wind catchers that channeled the wind into the structure, cooling the air temperature inside. Even if it was blistering hot outside, the inside of a yakchal would be like stepping into a walk-in fridge. The Marib Dam. The Marib Dam in Yemen was once the greatest dam in the entire world. It's considered in the top 10 of the greatest engineering marvels of prehistory, a great success of human ingenuity that stretched for 1,500 feet. Ancient people in Arabia used the dam to turn what was otherwise a desert into an oasis paradise. They used the dam to irrigate roughly 100 square miles of sandy soil, something that never before had been done on such a megalithic scale. When the dam was broken and collapsed in the 6th century, it was so devastating to the region that it brought the destruction of the city of Marib, wiping out an entire kingdom. Marib was the seat of power for the kingdom of Saba. The kingdom was wildly wealthy because of their trading power along the spice route that ran between the Mediterranean and further in the east. This was only possible because of the Great Dam. The irrigation allowed the Saba to grow more crops, which produced more frankincense and myrrh, their chief exports on the spice route. It also allowed them to adequately feed their people, which was of course hugely important. The dam lasted even after the Sabaeans were replaced by the Himyarite, but only until around 570. Lasting somewhere around 1,000 years makes it one of the most successful building projects in human history. Ancient prosthetics. Prosthetics are by no means a new invention. This is actually an ancient technology that goes back at least 3,000 years. 2 decades ago, when archaeologists were excavating a burial chamber in an ancient Egyptian necropolis near Luxor, they came across an exquisitely made prosthetic of a big toe. It had been fitted to a woman who was the daughter of an important Egyptian priest. The artifact is now known as the Cairo toe, and it's the oldest prosthesis that's ever been found. In modern times, researchers used computer tomography and X-ray scans to get to the bottom of how the toe was made. They created a 3D mock-up of the device, identified which materials were used in its creation, and saw how it was crafted. They even learned that the toe had been refitted several times to perfectly match with the woman's foot. According to the press release from the University of Basel in Switzerland, the artisan who crafted the toe must have been really familiar with human physiognomy. The toe came complete with a robust belt strap to keep it in place. It was carved to have a natural look while still being comfortable. It also probably helped the woman in her everyday life. It's doubtful the toe was only for looks, but probably improved her balance and made walking a lot easier. The Barbegal Mill. There is an ancient ruin at the Roman site of Barbegal that was once a water mill, an amazing piece of technology that allowed the Romans to harness the power of water. It's located near the small French town of Arles and was likely employed by the Romans for industrial use in the 2nd century AD. There are also 2 ancient aqueducts nearby, which likely supplied the city with almost unlimited water. The mill was a huge complex built against the slope of a hill, complete with 16 water wheels. These water wheels utilized water coming in from the aqueducts to power a flour mill. It was an industrial-scale operation way before its time. In fact, the Barbegal Mill has been called the greatest concentration of mechanical power anywhere in the ancient world. What was the flour mill used for? For making bread, of course. This was the center of bread making in all of ancient Roman-occupied France. Experts have estimated about 4.5 tons of pure flour was made per day thanks to the advanced engineering of the mill. That was enough bread for up to 10,000 people a day, meaning the residents in this ancient Roman city had an abundance of bread. They had unlimited flour and water, two commodities most people could only dream of having a constant supply of 2,000 years ago. Vimana. A vimana is an ancient flying ship that may or may not have existed. In Hindu texts, the vimana is described as a flying chariot, a self-moving vehicle that carried its occupants through the air. Some accounts have described it as a house or a palace, saying it was up to 7 stories tall. Other accounts have described it more modestly, as a seat or throne that magically hovered high above the heads of ancient people. In fact, vimana translates directly in some Indian languages to aircraft. Sadly, not a single piece of physical evidence has ever been discovered to suggest the Indians really did create flying vehicles thousands of years ago, but there has been plenty of speculation. Some claim the vimanas used highly advanced mercury vortex engines to hover over land. Some say they were powered by jet engines. There are weird accounts of elephants running in panic as huge hovering vimana came gliding over the land. There are even suggestions that specialized gyroscopes embedded in liquid mercury kept the vehicles airborne. But like I said before, the only actual evidence is in myth. There are plenty of references to these flying machines, from the account in ancient writings to carvings in temples and depictions in ancient artwork. Some believe the vimana weren't actually used by humans, but were the spaceships of extraterrestrials that visited Earth for a few hundred years before going back to space. Thanks for watching! Which of these ancient technological marvels impressed you the most? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!